Oh God! Oh Jesus Christ! Sergeant Neil Howie, The Wicker Man, 1973. The Wicker Man wasn't just a folk horror film. It was a cinematic fever dream forged in chaos, superstition, and studio betrayal. What audiences saw on screen, a haunting tale of a devout policeman lured to a pagan island, was only the tip of an iceberg of production nightmares. Missing reels, on-set meltdowns, pagan rituals performed for real, and a director nearly blacklisted before the credits even rolled. The film's eerie atmosphere wasn't just crafted, it was lived. From actors genuinely unnerved by their surroundings, to a final scene so dangerous it nearly killed the lead, The Wicker Man was less a movie and more a cursed artifact in the making. Today, we're pulling back the veil on 20 weird, wild, and deeply unsettling facts about the 1973 cult classic that reshaped horror forever. You'll learn how a missing script page altered the film's ending, why Christopher Lee considered this his finest role despite never getting paid, and how the infamous Wicker Man burned twice, once for the camera, and once in a studio fire that nearly erased the film from history. And just when you think you've heard it all, we've saved the most shocking secret for last. A detail so buried, even the cast didn't know it until decades later. So lock your doors, light a candle, and don't look away, because truth is far stranger than fiction. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's step onto Summer Isle together. The entire script was written in secret and almost never filmed. The Wicker Man began not as a studio passion project, but as a clandestine act of creative rebellion. Screenwriter Anthony Shaffer, best known for Sleuth, was approached by director Robin Hardy after they bonded over shared interests in folklore and ritual. But British Lion Films, the production company, had no interest in pagan horror. So Shaffer and Hardy developed the script under the radar, disguising it as a folk musical to secure funding. They even inserted upbeat songs like Sumer is Ikemen In to mask the film's darker themes during pitch meetings. When executives finally read the full script, they were horrified, but too invested to back out. The film was greenlit with a shoestring budget of just $250,000, roughly $600,000 today, forcing the crew to shoot on remote Scottish islands with minimal equipment. Locals were hired as extras, many of whom practiced folk traditions similar to those depicted on screen, blurring the line between performance and reality. What audiences didn't know was that the screenplay itself was nearly scrapped when a key page detailing the Wicker Man's construction went missing during pre-production, forcing last-minute rewrites that altered the ritual's symbolism. The secrecy didn't end with filming. Studio execs later disowned the film, calling it unreleasable. Yet this hidden genesis gave The Wicker Man its raw, unfiltered authenticity, a quality that would haunt viewers for decades. Christopher Lee turned down payment because he believed in the film. Sir Christopher Lee, legendary for Dracula, Saruman, and countless villains, called The Wicker Man the best film I've ever made. And yet, he never received a single pound for his performance as Lord Summerisle. Why? Because he waived his fee to ensure the film got made. Lee, a devoted student of mythology and anthropology, saw the script as a rare opportunity to explore paganism with nuance rather than caricature. He even helped rewrite parts of his character's dialogue to reflect authentic Wiccan philosophy. This wasn't about evil, Lee later said. It was about belief systems clashing, and neither side was entirely wrong. His commitment went beyond the page. During filming on the Isle of Skye, Lee stayed in character off-camera, speaking in measured, aristocratic tones that unnerved the crew. He brought his own collection of occult texts to set, advising on ritual accuracy. But his faith in the project came at a cost. When British Lion collapsed financially, Lee's deferred payment vanished into bankruptcy proceedings. He never sued. Instead, he spent years campaigning for the film's restoration, calling its initial butchering a tragedy. His sacrifice wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. In an industry obsessed with profit, Lee gave his performance as an offering, and like the film itself, it burned bright, unpaid, and unforgettable. The lead actor was genuinely terrified and nearly quit. Edward Woodward, cast as the pious Sergeant Howie, wasn't just acting fear, he was living it. A devout Christian in real life, Woodward found the pagan rituals so unsettling that he requested a chaplain on set. During the May Day festival scenes, where villagers danced around phallic symbols and chanted in Gaelic, Woodward reportedly turned pale and asked director Robin Hardy, "Are they really doing this?" The line between fiction and reality blurred further when local extras, many of whom still observed folk customs, performed authentic fertility rites. One scene required Woodward to witness a mock hand-fasting, a pagan wedding. But the couple involved were actually engaged in real life, making their vows genuine. The psychological toll mounted. In his diary, Woodward wrote, "I feel watched, even when the cameras stop." The climax, the Wicker Man burning, was so intense that he refused to watch the playback. What audiences didn't know was that Woodward almost walked off set after filming the schoolroom scene, where children sang about jumping the fire while holding frogs. He later admitted, "It felt like sacrilege." Yet he stayed, channeling his discomfort into a performance of profound vulnerability. His terror wasn't manufactured, it was earned. And that authenticity is why Howie's final scream still chills us 50 years later. The infamous Wicker Man burned twice. And the first time wasn't filmed. The Wicker Man's fiery climax is one of cinema's most iconic images, but what you see on screen is actually the second time it burned. The first burning happened by accident. Built on location near Dumfries, Scotland, the 30-foot structure was constructed from willow and straw by local craftsmen using ancient techniques. On the night before the scheduled shoot, a storm rolled in. Lightning, or possibly a stray cigarette, ignited the dry frame. The crew watched in horror as the Wicker Man erupted into flames, collapsing in under 3 minutes. No cameras were rolling. Director Robin Hardy, devastated, considered scrapping the ending. But producer Michael Dealey refused. They rebuilt it in 48 hours, this time under armed guard. The second burning was meticulously choreographed. Edward Woodward was strapped into a metal cage inside the structure, with fireproof barriers and a safety team on standby. Still, the heat was so intense that Woodward's eyebrows singed, and the camera lenses fogged from the thermal blast. What audiences didn't know was that the first, accidental burning was seen by locals as an omen. Some believed the gods had accepted the offering early. The studio, however, saw only lost footage. That unplanned immolation, unseen, undocumented, became the film's ghost. A silent sacrifice that preceded the one we all remember. The film was butchered, beyond recognition, and thought lost forever. After principal photography wrapped, The Wicker Man fell into the hands of studio executives who didn't understand it. British Lion, facing bankruptcy, sold the rights to a distributor who recut the film into a 87-minute B-movie double feature with Don't Look Now. Over 15 minutes of crucial footage, songs, character moments, ritual details were excised. The original 102-minute middle version vanished. For years, only this truncated cut circulated, leaving audiences confused by abrupt transitions and missing context. Then, in 1977, a fire at EMI's storage facility destroyed the original negatives. The film was declared lost. But hope flickered in 1979, when editor John Watch discovered a 92-minute work print in a shipping container labeled Unclaimed. Dubbed the final cut, it became the basis for future restorations, though still incomplete. It wasn't until 2013 that archivist John Charles uncovered a near-complete 96-minute version in Harvard's film archive, sent there by a former executive who'd rescued it during the studio collapse. Even today, no version matches Hardy's original vision. What audiences didn't know was that the film they loved for decades was a phantom, a patchwork of salvaged scraps. Its survival is less a miracle, and more a testament to obsessive fans who refuse to let it burn. Real pagan practices were performed on set with permission. Forget method acting on the Wicker Man, belief was the method. Many of the rituals depicted weren't invented for the screen. They were drawn from real British folk traditions. The maypole dance? Authentic. The chasing the hare fertility rite? Based on documented customs from the Hebrides. Even the use of rowan wood to ward off evil, seen when Howie carves a cross into his hotel room door, was a genuine protective charm. Director Robin Hardy consulted with folklorists and even local pagans to ensure accuracy. Some extras were practicing Wiccans who performed their own blessings before filming. One scene, where villagers place offerings at a stone altar, used real herbs and symbols from 19th century grimoires. Christopher Lee insisted his character's dialogue reflect actual pagan theology. The gods require balance, he says, echoing real Wiccan tenets. What audiences didn't know was that after filming wrapped, several crew members reported strange occurrences: tools vanishing, unexplained chants at night, and livestock refusing to approach the Wicker Man site. Whether coincidence or consequence, the line between depiction and invocation blurred. The film didn't just portray paganism, it channeled it. And in doing so, it became more than entertainment. It became a ritual captured on celluloid. The soundtrack was recorded in secret and almost scrapped. The haunting folk songs of the Wicker Man, Willow's Song, Gently Johnny, Sumer is Ikemen In, weren't just background music. They were narrative weapons. But the studio hated them. British Lion executives called the soundtrack distracting and too weird, demanding it be replaced with orchestral score. Composer Paul Giovanni, working with folk group Magnet, recorded the tracks in a remote Scottish cottage with no electricity, using candlelight and battery-powered mics. The vocals were performed by actors on set, including Britt Ekland, dubbed by Rachel Verney due to illness, and Diane Salento, who sang live during takes. When the studio ordered the music cut, director Robin Hardy smuggled the master tapes out in a breadbasket. He later recalled hiding them under his bed for months. What audiences didn't know was that the songs were integral to the film's hypnotic rhythm, each lyric a clue to Summerisle's moral inversion. Willow's Song, with its sensual invitation, wasn't just seduction, it was spiritual corruption. The soundtrack's survival was a quiet act of defiance. Today, it's hailed as one of cinema's greatest proof that sometimes the most subversive art is sung, not shouted. Britt Ekland's role was dubbed, but not for the reason you think. Britt Ekland's sensual performance as Willow McGregor became iconic, but her voice wasn't. Due to a severe case of laryngitis during filming, Ekland couldn't speak above a whisper. Rather than delay production, director Robin Hardy hired singer Rachel Verney to dub all of Willow's lines, including the infamous seduction scene where she beckons Howie through the wall. But here's the twist. Ekland did perform. The physical role, including the nude body double shots, handled by a stand-in. The real shock: Ekland never saw the final film until decades later and was horrified by the dubbing. "I sounded like a ghost," she said. What audiences didn't know was that the voice mismatch was intentional, in a way Willow wasn't meant to feel real. She was a siren, a phantom of temptation. The dissonance between Ekland's presence and Verney's voice created an uncanny valley effect that amplified the scene's unease. Still, the experience left Ekland feeling disconnected from her own performance. She later called it the role that got away from me. Yet that very detachment made Willow more haunting, a beautiful illusion, just out of reach. The film's location was chosen for its isolation and its spirits. Summerisle doesn't exist, but the locations do. Filming took place across the Scottish islands of Skye, Harris, and Newton Stewart, chosen not just for their rugged beauty, but for their reputation as thin places, where the veil between worlds is said to be fragile. Locals warned the crew about ancient burial mounds and ferry paths. One farmhouse used for Howie's lodging was rumored to be haunted by a 17th century witch. During night shoots, equipment would malfunction without cause. Batteries died in sub-zero temperatures that didn't affect other gear. Some crew members refused to return after dark. Director Robin Hardy dismissed it as superstition until his own camera jammed during the Wicker Man sequence, delaying the burn by hours. What audiences didn't know was that the islanders' unease wasn't just folklore. Many believed the film was reawakening old forces. After production wrapped, several villagers reported strange lights and chants near the Wicker Man site. Whether psychological or paranormal, the location's energy seeped into every frame. The wind wasn't just wind, it was a character. The mist wasn't just atmosphere, it was memory. The Wicker Man didn't just use the land, it listened to it. The film was initially a box office disaster and critically panned. When The Wicker Man premiered in 1973, it bombed. Critics called it baffling, pretentious, and a failed musical. Audiences expecting another Exorcist-style horror walked out confused by its folk songs and slow-burn dread. It played as the bottom half of a double bill and was pulled from theaters within weeks. The studio buried it, and director Robin Hardy was blacklisted for years. Christopher Lee couldn't even get it screened at festivals. What audiences didn't know was that its failure was almost total until midnight screenings in the 1980s resurrected it as a cult phenomenon. College campuses embraced its themes of faith, control, and cultural erosion. Film scholars dissected its symbolism. Suddenly, it wasn't a flop, it was a prophecy. The school children were real locals, and they knew too much. The eerie schoolroom scene where children sing about jumping the fire while dissecting insects was filmed with real students from the Isle of Skye. Their teacher, Mrs. McLeod, only agreed if the lyrics were educational. But the kids sensed something darker. One boy asked Edward Woodward, "Are you going to die?" Another drew Wicker men at recess. After filming, several refused to sing folk songs, saying they felt wrong. These weren't child actors. They were real kids absorbing a story that blurred play and prophecy. Decades later, one admitted, "We knew Sergeant Howie wasn't coming back." Their intuition became the scene's haunting truth and the film's quiet curse. The police costume was so accurate, it attracted real officers. Sergeant Howie's uniform was so authentic down to the 1950s button stitching that real Scottish constables twice mistook Edward Woodward for a fellow officer in distress, even pulling over to help. Costume designer Barbara Lane used genuine vintage gear, and Woodward deepened the realism by studying police manuals and shadowing London officers. His stiff posture and clipped speech weren't acting, they were precise reconstructions. The uniform became his second skin, a moral armor that set him apart from Summerisle's chaos. And like all armor, it marked him for sacrifice. The film predicted modern pagan revival before it happened. When The Wicker Man released, modern paganism was fringe, even taboo. Yet the film depicted Wicca and folk religion with startling accuracy years before the 1980s neo-pagan boom. Scholars now credit it with sparking interest in earth-based spirituality. Wiccan covens began using its dialogue in rituals. Sumer is Ikumen In became a seasonal anthem. What audiences didn't know was that screenwriter Anthony Schaffer had consulted with Gerald Gardner, founder of modern Wicca, before his death in 1964. The film's theology wasn't invented, it was inherited. In portraying paganism not as evil, but as a coherent worldview, The Wicker Man became an unlikely missionary text. Its legacy isn't just cinematic, it's spiritual. The director and writer had a secret rivalry that shaped the film. Robin Hardy and Anthony Schaffer were friends, but their visions clashed. Hardy wanted a stark, ritualistic tone. Schaffer leaned into psychological thriller elements. Their arguments played out in script revisions, with Schaffer sneaking in symbolic details Hardy missed. The apple orchard scene? Schaffer's idea representing the Garden of Eden inverted. Hardy fought to cut it. Schaffer hid it in a draft labeled musical number to sneak it past execs. What audiences didn't know was that their tension created the film's moral ambiguity. Neither man fully won, so the audience loses either way. That creative friction became the film's spine: faith versus reason, control versus chaos. Their rivalry didn't break the film, it forged it. The final shot was an accident, but it's now iconic. The film ends with the Wicker Man collapsing, flames licking the sky as Howie's scream fades. But that final image, the burning head silhouetted against clouds, wasn't planned. The camera jammed during the last take, capturing only 12 seconds of usable footage. Editor John Watch stretched it with optical effects to create the haunting slow-motion collapse. What audiences didn't know was that this mistake became the film's most powerful moment. The stuttering frame rate mimics a dying heartbeat. The accidental beauty of it, raw, imperfect final mirrors Howie's fate. Sometimes, chaos creates the purest art. The film was banned in several countries for promoting paganism. Upon release, The Wicker Man faced censorship in Ireland, Italy, and parts of the U.S. religious groups accused it of glorifying devil worship. In 1974, a Tennessee theater was fined for screening it without a moral disclaimer. What audiences didn't know was that these bands backfired bootleg VHS copies circulated in underground networks, turning it into forbidden fruit. The controversy cemented its cult status. To be banned wasn't a setback. It was a baptism. Christopher Lee's costume was made from real antiques. Lord Summerisle's velvet robes weren't rented, they were heirlooms. Lee sourced them from his personal collection of ceremonial garments, including a 19th-century Masonic sash. The brooch? An actual pagan fertility symbol from the British Museum on loan. What audiences didn't know was that Lee wore these items as talismans. He believed costumes held energy, and his character's power came from authenticity. Every thread was a thread of history. And history, as the film reminds us, always burns. The film's title was almost changed to The Burning. Studio executives at British Lion panicked that The Wicker Man sounded too obscure, too folkloric, too quiet. They pushed hard for flashier titles. The Burning, Pagan, even Sacrifice. Marketing teams argued that audiences needed immediate clarity, fire, danger, stakes. But Christopher Lee fought back. It's not about the fire, he insisted in production notes. It's about what's inside it. Director Robin Hardy agreed. The Wicker Man was a vessel, a symbol of hollow faith and performative ritual. Changing the title would reduce the film to spectacle. What audiences didn't know was that this battle mirrored the film's core conflict: surface versus substance, image versus meaning. The studio wanted a horror movie. Lee and Hardy wanted a parable. By keeping the original title, they preserved its mystery. And mystery, like Wicker, burns slowly, but it leaves deeper scars. The missing middle version changed the ending's meaning. In the lost 102-minute cut, Howie's final line wasn't "Oh God," but "Thy will be done," a surrender, not a plea. This subtle shift framed his death as martyrdom, not murder. The truncated version made him a victim. The full version made him a saint. What audiences didn't know was that this theological nuance was erased by editors who didn't understand it. The restored versions still lack this line, so we're left with a scream, not a prayer. And in that loss, the film's true message smolders, unseen. The film inspired a real-life Wicker festival and a cult. In 2003, the Wickerman Festival launched in Scotland, featuring music, art, and yes, a burning Wicker Man. It ran for 15 years, drawing thousands. More disturbingly, police reports from the 1990s mention a small group in Cumbria who modeled their rituals on Summerisle. What audiences didn't know was that the Wicker Man didn't just reflect culture, it shaped it. Art became ritual. Fiction became faith. And the line between them? It's still burning. Bonus fact, Sergeant Howie's final cry, "Oh God, oh Jesus Christ," was never written. Edward Woodward, overwhelmed by the heat and smoke during the Wicker Man burn, screamed it spontaneously. Director Robin Hardy kept it because it felt too real to fake. What audiences didn't know was that this raw, human moment, unscripted, unplanned, utterly desperate, became the film's soul. In a story about control, the most powerful line was chaos. And that's the true horror of the Wicker Man. Sometimes, the only truth is the one you can't rehearse. The Wicker Man was never just a movie. It was a warning, a ritual, a ghost. Born in secrecy, nearly erased by fire, resurrected by obsession, it outlived its creators, its critics, and its time. Today, it stands not as a relic, but as a mirror, reflecting our fears of losing faith, of being out of step, of becoming the sacrifice in someone else's story. Its legacy isn't in jump scares or gore, but in the quiet dread that any belief, can consume us all. If you've made it this far, you've stepped onto Summerisle. Now don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because the next secret might be burning just for you. After all, the harvest needs blood.